Hello, reading students. Happy Friday. I'm gone again today because I am in St. Louis for a wedding. I'm going to read to you chapter 20 and chapter 21. You should have questions just like you had yesterday that go along with this chapter. So try and answer them as I read you these two chapters, and then the sub will go over the answers with you. Please make sure you're being on best behavior. Remember, if you are doing really, really well, then I can bring you some kind of treat or something on Tuesday because we don't have school on Monday. So here we go. Chapter 20, Among the Hidden. Luke feared he'd have to wait months between visits to Jin once the snow started, but the weather proved kind that winter. Most days were dry and clear. He didn't have leafy trees to hide behind, but he began to feel safe anyway, crawling through his and Jin's backyards. By mid-January, he could make the entire journey without his heart beating abnormally at all. The odds against someone watching from one of the other Barron houses seemed too astronomical to worry about. His only concern was Dad. Dad usually hung around the house a lot during the winter. Without the hogs to tend to, he could easily have been there even more than usual, preventing Luke from ever sneaking out. But suddenly, Dad had taken to heading to town many mornings, yelling up to Luke, "I'm going to the library. You've got something up there to eat for lunch, don't you?" Or, "There's some plastic tubing over to Slyton I want to check out. Tell the boys when they get in from school, you hear?" "It's that hydroponics notion," Luke bragged to Jin one day in late January while they were sitting at the computer together. "I got Dad all excited about it, and now he's too busy with that to notice what I do." "What's hydroponics?" Jin asked. "It was in one of your books. You know, growing plants indoors without soil, just using water and special minerals." "Oh," Jin said. "Does he think the government would actually let him do that?" "I guess so," Luke said. "But why wouldn't they?" Jin shrugged. "Why does the government do anything?" Luke didn't have an answer to that. Jin turned back to the computer chat room where everyone was debating fake IDs. Carlos. "Mom says they won't buy me one until I'm 18 because she thinks the government wouldn't challenge an adults as much, and maybe they'll be cheaper then." Pat. "Maybe Sean and I will get ours by the time we're 90. Dad and Mom have been saving for them as long as we can remember." Yolanda. "My dad says he's waiting to find one that's foolproof. He says there are too many bad ones out there." Jim began typing furiously. "Who needs a fake ID? Carlos, they'd probably get one for you that says John Smith, and you'd have to spend the rest of your life trying to pass for an Anglo. My parents have been begging me to get a fake ID for years, but I won't until I can have one that says Jin Talbot and is really mine." "Have you all forgotten the rally? We're going to get real IDs that say who we really are. We aren't fakes. We shouldn't have to hide." She jabbed the enter button so hard the computer shook. "But Jen," Luke said timidly, "I thought you used a fake ID to go shopping with your mom. It said you were her niece?" Jen turned her fierce gaze to Luke. "No, that was just a shopping pass," she said. "I don't like using that either, but I figured I can't fight my parents about everything. What they're talking about," she pointed at the computer screen, "is taking on a fake identity permanently. Most shadow kids do that eventually. They go live with another family and pretend to be someone they aren't for the rest of their lives." "So you would rather hide?" Luke asked. He thought about using a different name, living in a different family, being a different person. He couldn't imagine it. "No, of course I wouldn't rather hide," Jin said irritably. "But getting one of those IDs, that's just a different way of hiding. I want to be me and go about like anyone else. There's no compromise, which is why I've got to convince these idiots that the rally's their only chance." There was a shocked blankness on the computer screen after Jin's entry. And then Carlos ventured, Jin? Got any of your parents' blood pressure medicine handy? Sounds like you need it. Jen stabbed the power button on the computer. The screen instantly went dark, and she spun around in her chair and clenched her fist. Ugh! She screamed with a grimace of frustration. Jen? Luke asked. He leaned away from her in case she decided to use those clenched fists. Jen turned to Luke in surprise, as though she'd forgotten he was there. Don't you ever feel like saying, I can't take this anymore? She asked. She leaped up and began pacing the floor. Don't you ever just want to walk out into the sunshine and say, forget hiding, I don't care. Am I the only one who feels this way? No, Luke whispered. She whirled around and pointed at the computer. Then what's wrong with them? Why don't they understand? Why aren't they taking this seriously? Luke bit his lip. I think, he said, people just have different ways of expressing what they feel. Those kids make jokes and complain. You run around screaming your head off and tackling people. He was proud of himself for figuring that out, considering he really only knew 5 people in the whole world. But for the first time, he wondered how the rest of his family would cope if any of them had to hide. Dad would get grumpy. Mother would try to make the best of it, but you'd be able to tell that she was really unhappy. Matthew would be quiet, but would look sad all the time, the way he looked every time anyone mentioned the pigs they couldn't keep anymore. Mark would gripe so much that he'd make everyone miserable. For the first time, Luke felt a glimmer of pride that he dealt with hiding better than anyone else in his family would, he thought. Jen snorted at his explanation. Whatever, she said. She slid back into her chair by the computer. But the rally's in April. I've got 3 months to make sure everyone's ready. She switched on the computer and began typing furiously again. Luke slipped away a few hours later. He wasn't sure Jen even noticed him leaving. Chapter 21. In February, Dad got the letter from the government forbidding him from trying to grow anything indoors. It has come to our attention that you have been pursuing excess amounts of plastic pipe, such as is used in the germination, cultivation, and development of vegetable matter in an interior structure, the letter began. Due to the preponderance of such agricultural methods in the cultivation of illegal substances, we order you to cease and desist immediately. Luke read the letter at supper, after everyone else in the family had a stab at trying to figure out what it meant. Somehow, after reading all of the big books that Jen had loaned him, he didn't find the fancy words so daunting. They want you to stop, Luke said. They're scared you're going to grow something illegal. And this part, he pointed at the letter, although everyone else was at the table several feet away, and he was in his usual spot on the stairs. This part, where they say, render all such materials for our education, that means you have to turn over all the stuff you bought, and they'll decide if they're going to fine you or not. The rest of the family looked at Luke in amazement, and then Mark started giggling. Drugs, he said. They think you're going to grow drugs. Dad flashed him a look of pure disgust. Think it's funny? We'll see what you think next year when your feet grow and we don't have any money for new shoes. Mark stopped laughing. We'll get by, Luke's mother said quietly. We always have. Dad shoved back from the table. Why didn't I get a permit? He asked to no one in particular. Maybe if I just get a permit. By then, Luke had read the rest of the letter. They don't give out permits for hydroponics, he said. This says it's always illegal. This time he got only a glare from Dad. Luke felt his father's disappointment, and seeing his parents so worried about money made a small voice whisper in the back of his head. Maybe if they didn't have you, they could afford everything they want. But he didn't eat that much, and all of his clothes were hand-me-downs from Matthew and Mark. And how much could it cost to heat his attic room? Sometimes he found ice crystals on the door he sat in to watch the neighborhood. He tried to ignore the voice. What bothered him more was that without the hydroponics idea to keep him busy, Dad barely left the farm for the rest of the winter. Luke made it over to Jen's only once in all of February and twice in March, when Dad began driving around looking for the best seed corn prices. But each time, Jen greeted him with big hugs and acted genuinely thrilled to see him. Her tantrum in January seemed forgotten. One day, the two of them made a huge mess of the Talbots' kitchen baking cookies. "Won't your parents mind?" Luke asked, when Jen scolded him for attempting to clean the flour handprints off the cabinets and refrigerator and the stove. "Are you kidding? I want this preserved. They'll be thrilled to see any sign of domesticity on my part," Jen said. Another time they played board games all morning, sprawled out on the floor of the Talbots' family room. The third day, they just spent the whole time talking. Jen kept Luke enthralled with stories of places that she had been, people she had met, and things she'd seen. "When I was little, Mom used to take me to a play group that was called All Third Children," Jen said, and she giggled. "The thing was, it was all government officials' kids. I think some of the parents didn't even like the kids. They just thought it was a status symbol to break the population law and get away with it." "What'd you do with the playgroup?" Luke asked. "Well, played, of course. Everyone had a lot of toys, and one of the kids had a dog he brought with him sometimes, and we all took turns feeding it dog biscuits." "These people had pets too?" Luke asked incredulously. "Well, you know, they're barons," Jen said. Luke frowned. He slid down in the soft couch so differently than from anything in his own house. "My dad says that when he was little, just about everyone he knew had pets. He had a dog named Bootsy and a cat named Stripey. He talks about them all the time. Why did the government make pets illegal?" "Oh, you know, the food thing," Jen said. She took a sorry guys. She took a chocolate chip cookie from a pack they were sharing and waved it for emphasis. "Without dogs and cats, there's more food for humans. My dad says if it weren't for the barons breaking the law, lots of species would have gone extinct." Luke looked at the cookie in his own hand. So now was he supposed to feel guilty about eating food that should have gone to animals as well as other people? Jen saw his expression. "Hey, don't go dopey on me," she said. "It's all a scam, remember? There's more than enough food in the world, especially now that there aren't enough babies being born." "What?" Luke asked. "Well, besides passing the population law, the government went on this big campaign to make women think it was something evil to get pregnant and have kids. They put up posters in all of the cities with things like, 'Who's the worst criminal?' under a picture of a pregnant lady and, I don't know, some tough-looking crook. And then, if you read the whole sign, it'd tell you the woman was the worst of all." "Another one?" Jen giggled. It had a picture of a huge pregnant belly with the label, 'Ladies, do you want to look like this?' And women aren't allowed to go anywhere once they get pregnant. So now, my dad told me, there are so few babies being born that the population's going to be cut in half." Luke shook his head, confused as usual. "So why doesn't the government take down the signs and let people have as many babies as they want?" Jen rolled her eyes. "Luke, you've got to quit thinking that this makes any sense," Jen said. "It's the government, remember? That's why we've got to have the rally." Luke changed the subject as quickly as he could. "What do women do if they can't go anywhere the whole time they're pregnant? I don't know about humans, but pigs take almost 4 months to have a baby. Do the women stay home all that time?" "Hiding, like us, you mean?" Jen asked. But she took the distraction. "Lots of them pretend they're just getting fat. My mom said she went shopping the day before I was born and nobody noticed. But that's my mom and shopping." And then she was off on a tale about her mother taking Jen shopping in a city 10 hours away just because she'd heard a store sold good purses there. "That's probably the only reason why my brothers don't turn me in," Jen said. "If she didn't have me, my mother would drag them around shopping. Can you see those 2 gorillas with a shopping bag?" Jen did an impression, walking around with her arms dragging the imaginary loaded down bags. Even though Luke had only seen her brothers from a distance, he caught the resemblance and laughed. Your brothers would never turn you in, he protested. Would they? Of course not, Jen agreed. They love me. She hugged herself mockingly and flopped back onto the couch beside Luke. Anyhow, they wouldn't be smart enough to figure out how to turn me in without getting the rest of the family in trouble. What about your brothers? They're not stupid, Luke said defensively. Or do you mean, well, would they ever betray you? Jen narrowed her eyes, truly curious. Not now, necessarily, but say years from now, if your parents were dead and it wouldn't hurt anybody but you, and they'd get lots of money for it. It was a question Luke had never considered, but he knew the answer. Never, he said, his voice cracking with earnestness. I can trust them. I mean, we grew up together. It was strange how he could be so sure, because they barely took time to tease him anymore. Matthew was getting very serious with his girlfriend and spent every spare moment at her house. Mark had suddenly gone basketball crazy and talked Dad into nailing an old tire rim to the front of the barn for a hoop. Luke could hear him outside throwing balls late into the night. No matter how certain he was of their loyalty, Luke sometimes felt like his brothers had outgrown him. He missed them. But it didn't matter. He had Jen now. Luke kept Jen from talking about the rally the rest of that day, and they didn't even go near the computer. They just had fun. He crawled back to his house a few hours later, thinking that he didn't mind at all anymore having to hide. He could go on this way forever as long as he got to visit Jen. The lease would come back to the tree soon, and he'd feel even safer on his trips to her house. And when planting season started, Dad would be out in the fields all day, and Luke could see Jen all the time. But April came before planting season. Okay, now you're going to answer the questions, and I hope you have a lovely day.